saw my bridesmaids mocking his looks in our wedding video. What he did next ruined everything. I may have shot myself right in the foot, and I'm right in a spot where I can't even find a way of getting out. I've been married for 3 weeks, and instead of being together and happy with my husband and enjoying marriage, or even being on our honeymoon and reliving and enjoying our decision to be married, renewing our vows and love to each other in private this time, I have not even had a chance to see my husband after the wedding. He had just left before the wedding even ended at all, and it had all been my fault. I've tried so hard to reach him and not explain, but apologize and beg for his forgiveness, but he wouldn't even let me know where he is and refuses to respond to any of my texts or pick up my calls, which is why I'm here. I need some advice desperately. I really cannot lose him. I love him so much, and I honestly regret everything that happened. I should probably explain why I'm here, what I had done, and why I'm a bride without a husband a few days after her wedding. Well, here goes nothing. Hello, Reddit. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 29 years old. I used to work as a secretary in a mini company, and I just quit a month before the wedding. I had told my husband about my decision not to work while we were married because I wanted to be a full housewife and take care of our kids. But something horrible had happened during our wedding, and Eric, my husband, had been very upset. He saw my bridesmaids mocking his looks in our wedding video. What he did next ruined everything. Before you all start throwing blame, I know I'm at fault, but it hadn't exactly been my fault from the beginning. You know, growing up as a child, I always dreamed of marrying the perfect man. I mean perfect in all senses of the word. His physique, his face, and even his color. Everything had to be perfect. I didn't have the idea from a movie or anything like that. I had real-life examples. My parents were so perfect together. They were so beautiful to look at, and even as a child, I always admired them so much. People mostly doubted that they weren't very young because of how beautiful they really did look. But the problem was that, of all my siblings, and we're 4, I'm the last child, I was the only one who did not look anything like my parents. I had apparently gotten my own looks from my grandma. Believe me when I say I love my grandma because she was always very nice and adored me, especially because I looked like her. But that was enough for me to have an inferiority complex. I hated how I looked, especially because I always compared myself to my perfect parents and siblings. Although my parents always tried as much as possible to protect me from public opinion, it didn't stop me from feeling like a black sheep among them. So I had deduced that I needed to marry right. I needed to have a perfect husband so I could have a perfect child who would look nothing like me physically. But many times my friends and sisters picked on me. Whenever I got the attention of a guy I liked, no matter how hard I tried to keep the relationship, whenever they saw my friends and siblings, I got cut off immediately. It made me hate my siblings and friends, and I wanted to leave the environment as fast as I could. So when I was out of high school, I chose a school very far from home so I didn't have any of them around, and I could finally get the attention of the guys I wanted without the fear of my siblings or friends snatching them from me. It had been in my first year that I met Thompson. Thompson was so handsome, and he looked like someone straight out of a magazine with his perfect abs and perfect smile, and I had fallen in love with him on the first day of meeting. But Thompson had his pick of girls, so he didn't exactly notice me. So I had made myself noticeable to him. Despite the fact that I didn't have a perfect face, I luckily had the perfect body, although my inferiority complex made me cover up because I hadn't wanted guys coming to me because of my body, and not because they were in love with me. But I was desperate to get his attention, so I had started dressing rather sexy, and finally, Thompson had noticed me. Well, Thompson and I started hanging out together. By together, I mean he was sleeping with me, but he never acknowledged my presence in public. I was like the secret mistress, and even though I wasn't exactly okay with it, I had no choice because I just wanted to be around him, and I was cool with anything he wanted me to. I wanted to become something other than being a sex toy to Thompson, so I started helping him with his academics. We studied the same course, so all his assignments and anything academic related, I did for him. In fact, I prepared guidelines for him to read for exams so he could just master them. But I guess I wasn't enough because I found out too late that Thompson was cheating on me. But I couldn't exactly call it cheating as we were never really together. I ended things with Thompson and moved on, and then I met Sam. Sam was quite intelligent, and he was very handsome too, and while we were together, he never even cheated on me once. But the only problem was that Sam did not believe in marriage, and any talk of it just upset him. And even though I knew we wouldn't end up together, I still stayed in vain hopes of him changing his mind and deciding he loved me enough to want to marry me. But that had not happened in the long run. Sam and I were together for a year before Sam decided to relocate because he got a job. The problem was, the job he got had been halfway across the world, and he made no plans of bringing me with him. He had simply just left. 3 months later, I found out that he actually got married to his high school sweetheart, who lived where he worked now, through his friends who had attended his wedding. I decided that relationships with handsome men were just meant to be a doomed failure for me, and I had decided that I didn't want any handsome man in my life again, as they were all just cheaters. I had been working as a secretary in a small law firm when I met Eric. It had been about after a year working there before I met Eric. He had decided to leave the firm where he worked as a lawyer, but he had decided to relocate, so he applied to our firm, and he had gotten the job. He was obviously overqualified for the job, but he had decided to settle in our town. Eric isn't exactly fine. I mean, he is, but he does not have that turnhead's beauty, so I wasn't even interested in him in the first place, despite my resolution to stay away from overly handsome men. Eric, however, had shown interest in me right from the very first day he saw me. I mostly avoided him because of how much he pestered me for a date, but then it was difficult to do that, especially because we worked together in a relatively small firm. So eventually, I had agreed to go on a date with him, and it had actually been very fun. Eric is a good listener, and he was very, very easy to talk to and was never boring. I loved our conversations and his funny jokes, and when he invited me to dinner another time, I agreed immediately. We started texting and meeting more often, and before long, I was madly in love with Eric, and he also felt the same. So when he finally asked me to be his girlfriend, I had agreed, and we started dating. Everyone at our office knew we were together and approved of our relationship. We were literally called the cute couple at work, and any time they had a message for Eric, they came to me and vice versa. Eric and I were together for 6 months before we moved in together. I moved into his apartment, of course, because his apartment was bigger and better for both of us. It was after a year and a half of dating Eric that I had met his family. His father was celebrating his birthday, and his birthday wish had been to have his children around to celebrate with him. So Eric had asked me to go with him so I could get to meet his family. I agreed, but I was also anxious because I did not know if his family would like me at all. But Eric had reassured me, and I had gone with him to his father's birthday party. We were to stay 2 days, so we arrived a day before the party, and his family had been very welcoming. Surprisingly, his family had loved me even more than I had expected. His mom was exceptionally warm, and his dad was kind. And I also discovered something. Eric was just like me, the weird one in the family. His dad and his mom, despite their age, looked very handsome and beautiful respectively, and his 3 siblings had looked very, very fine. Although I had not met Simon, the eldest brother, until the day of the party. He had some things to do, so he could only show up on the day of the party. Because the party was filled with family and friends and people they knew, I wasn't exactly comfortable hanging around people I barely knew, so I just watched awkwardly as they interacted. Although Eric tried to help me fit in, I just wasn't cut out for all the childhood stories and memories, so I just excused myself and sat on a chair far enough to stay out of sight, but close enough to see what everyone was doing. Someone had walked up to me and started a casual conversation with me. He was so handsome, and he caught my eyes really well. Even though he said nothing really relevant, I just listened to him and laughed at his poor way of flirting with me. I had not even noticed Eric until he touched my shoulder and then introduced the person right in front of me as his brother. He had also introduced me as his girlfriend to his brother. That was how I met Simon. Although Eric introduced me as his girlfriend, Simon didn't seem to mind much as he still flirted with me before he was dragged away by one of their siblings to go greet their parents. The next morning after the party, I had not really seen Simon again because he had gone out to play golf with their father, and Eric had decided to take me on a tour around his hometown, and I had loads of fun. We left very early the next day after that and went back to our daily lives. But I had gotten a strange text, and it had been later I found out that it was Simon texting me because he had somehow gotten my number off his mom's phone. We started texting each other, and at first it had just been harmless flirting until it graduated into something more. All through it, I never told Eric that his brother and I were speaking, or even texting at all. It seemed like Eric and his brother didn't have the greatest relationship, and I didn't want to add to it. And then again, we weren't doing anything aside from having harmless conversations. And then, when it had graduated into something more, I just couldn't tell Eric because it would destroy what we had. Simon decided to come stay with us after a month of us chatting, and his unsuspecting brother had allowed it. Simon had, of course, lied that he had business in our town, and didn't want to have to waste money renting an apartment. Eric had even asked my opinion on the matter, and I knew if I rejected it, Simon would have never come to live with us, and maybe then I wouldn't be in all of this mess. Well, Simon had come to stay with us, and that had been the worst decision we ever made. Simon is fine, and sometimes when we step out together, people stare, and I feel lucky just walking beside him and making everyone else assume he was my boyfriend. Something of that sort had occurred again when my friends from high school had somehow been in town and had reached out to me. The two of them had called me to come have lunch with them because they had to leave immediately after, and luckily, I had been out getting some groceries for the house. Simon, who had been bored at home, had asked to come along with me, and I had allowed him. So when my friends had called, he had dropped me off at the restaurant, and then he went home. But my friends had seen him mostly because the car Simon drove was always open at the top, so they assumed he was my boyfriend who I told them about. They gushed about how handsome he was, and how lucky I was to have someone like that. When I told them that Simon is my boyfriend's brother, they assumed that Eric would be cuter than Simon since he was younger, and then again because he had a brother like that. I decided not to correct their mistakes, though, and allowed them to continue their gushing. Soon after that, Simon and I had sex for the first time. Eric had gone out of town for work. His client had apparently had to travel out of town for some urgent personal business and had offered to pay for his trip down so they could finalize business. So he was gone for 2 days, and Simon and I had been alone at the house. I cooked us dinner, and he had helped with the dishes. We had decided to have some champagne. We had gotten a bit tipsy, and then this and that had happened, and we had eventually just had sex. The morning after was really awkward because I felt so much guilt having slept with Eric's brother. I avoided Simon throughout the day, which was very difficult as we were literally stuck in the same house as it was Sunday, and I had no work. And Simon hadn't exactly made it easy to avoid him, as he made it seem as if it was bound to happen, and that we shouldn't have any regrets. Eric came back the next day, and we met at work, and I tried as much as possible to avoid really talking to him even at work. At home, I avoided both brothers by lying to them that I was a bit sick, but eventually, I stopped avoiding both of them. I continued pretending to Eric that I was 100% for him while sleeping with his brother Simon. It was hard keeping Eric off track, especially because Simon wasn't exactly good at covering his tracks. Eric had even assumed he had a girl he snuck into the house and that he was hiding her away from him. When Eric had eventually told Simon to bring the lady over, I had been scared of our secret coming out, but Simon had surprisingly shown up with a lady and introduced her to Eric as his girlfriend. I know it wasn't supposed to hurt me, mainly because I was cheating myself and on his brother with him for that matter, but I still felt that way. I felt jealous of the lady, and throughout dinner, I had not been myself. She was also very pretty, more pretty than I was, in fact, and my insecurities came to the surface again, just watching her do even the littlest thing with grace and looking cute with it too. Eric, of course, liked her, and he had mentioned it when we were in bed, cuddled up and ready to sleep, and I had been very angry and accused him of wanting to cheat on me. I even told him he wanted his brother's girl, and he wasn't even ashamed to say it. Eric had apologized that night, but I had been too angry to even listen, and I eventually slept in the other guest room that night. Well, I did sneak into Simon's room one time in the night, and I had sneaked back into the guest room back in the morning before Eric would wake up. And then Eric would not have guessed that I had not been mad at him that night, but at myself for feeling that way about an innocent lady, and then at Simon for actually bringing a lady home despite everything between us. Eric apologized again the next day, and I had forgiven him and dismissed the matter. Simon and I continued sneaking around, though, and it was more often than normal, but that made it easier for Eric to suspect things between us. One time, he had caught me stepping out of the direction of Simon's room, and I had to lie that I wanted to ask him if he would go grocery shopping with me the next day. This had happened around 2 a.m, and Eric had not said anything, but his whole expression had said it all. He didn't believe me at all. Another time we were having sex, and I mistakenly moaned Simon's name instead of Eric's, and he had heard me. But I had lied that I only wanted to say something about him, Simon, to him, Eric. And when he asked that I say it, I told him I wasn't exactly comfortable with his brother around anymore. By then, Simon had already stayed for over 2 months, so Eric had felt it was a valid reason, and he had promised to discuss it with his brother the next day. Although we went to sleep cuddling, all sexual feelings were on hold. Simon had come to me angrily when he heard from his brother about the idea of moving out, and I told him that it was a good idea because we got to spend more time outside the house and also be more free instead of sneaking around the house like teenagers. Simon had eventually agreed, and he moved out to an apartment 2 streets away, and we continued our affair. 2 months after that, Eric had proposed to me, and I had said yes, of course. I was so happy that I finally got to be with Eric, and a forever was assured. Simon hadn't been exactly happy, worried about our current relationship, and I had told him that being married to Eric would not stop our relationship. But that had been a lie. I planned to end everything with him once I was safely married, but I didn't want him jeopardizing things between Eric and me because of his violent temper. But I stupidly thought that if I was married to Eric already and then everything got exposed, I would only apologize and then Eric would forgive me and we would live happily together as husband and wife. I discussed with Eric that I wanted to quit my job and be a full-time housewife, and he had agreed with what I wanted. No, we didn't get married until 4 months after the proposal. Eric had wanted to buy us a house so we could move in as a newly wedded couple and start our lives together. And all the plans and everything had honestly been exciting. Well, I guess it's true what they say about not being able to eat your cake and still have it. Everything that could go wrong on my wedding day had gone wrong, and it just was so awful. I stopped going regularly to Simon's place and made excuses of work and Eric suspecting us. And he wasn't exactly pleased, but he didn't have much choice. But I still did show up at his place, and we still had sex. Eventually, my wedding preparations started, and I got too busy with planning every detail to have time for Simon. But that didn't stop us from meeting up every now and then. We had planned our wedding to be on New Year's Eve. Well, actually, I had suggested that date because I loved having an anniversary close to normal days of celebrating, and Eric had agreed with me just because he wanted to please me. Eric left literally every plan to me, and since I'd quit my job at that time, I had all the time to plan what I've always dreamed of my wedding to be. I also called my friends, and they were excited about my wedding and couldn't wait to see my spouse also. The wedding day came, and because I had stupidly decided to add the pictures of Eric and me over the years we were together as part of our wedding to make it more memorable, my friends, who had been shocked to discover that my husband wasn't even how they thought he was going to be, had not even been ashamed to say it to my face, and I thought little of what they had to say, so I hadn't corrected or shunned them at all. I just allowed them to mock Eric's looks and compare him to Simon. But I obviously thought that was the end of it all, but apparently they weren't finished, as when the video of us, Eric and me, started playing, they started mocking Eric and laughing. Eric had noticed them pointing at his pictures and laughing, and he had gotten angry and then stood up and ruined everything. Eric had taken the microphone, and he had stepped on the stage and announced that he wanted everyone to go home because the wedding was over. I was shocked, and I had gone to meet him and ask him what was happening, but he had just looked at me in disgust and waved a finger in my face and that of my friends. He had said that it probably was his ugly face that gave me valid reasons to cheat on him. I tried to deny the accusation, but Eric had laughed bitterly and had told me he knew that I was cheating on him with his brother. And then he had walked out before I had any opportunity to even apologize or anything. Maybe if I had not been so conscious, I would have noticed that Eric wasn't exactly enthusiastic about our wedding. Now that I have had 3 weeks to properly think about everything, Eric has been acting up 2 months after the proposal. He just mostly ignored me or listened half-heartedly to anything I had to say, and he also stopped asking anything about the wedding or even my whereabouts. I thought it had to do with work, so I had not paid much attention to it. Or maybe it had been because alternating between Simon and wedding preparations had taken most of my attention. But now I'm so scared and anxious. I cannot lose Eric. I really love him despite everything. Please, guys, please. I really need some advice. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been the most horrible month of my life. Days had turned into weeks, and the pain was more acute than the previous day. Eric has finally asked for a divorce. I didn't even think it possible to apply for a divorce for a marriage barely a month old, but Eric had done it. Maybe because he's a lawyer. I have signed the papers. I signed them because I am not worthy of even being married to Eric. I destroyed all we had, and the divorce is the only true way I could even make up even the tiniest bit of everything I have done. As I face the ruins of my relationship, I realized the true extent of my foolishness. I had thrown away a love that had been pure, true, and unwavering. For what? Cheap, exciting moments? Or should I say a momentary lapse in judgment? It's so sad how one could go from being the happiest to just being happy and then to being sad. But mine had gone directly from being the happiest to being miserable. The memories of our wedding day, when Eric had looked me in the eye with so much pain and anger in his eyes, remained stuck in my head. A moment I relive each day, and I didn't think it was possible to remember that every time, and it'd still hurt the same way. No, it's much worse than that. It definitely hurts more than the last time. I threw away everything, and I lost the love of my life over something as vague as having someone who's handsome. Silly me wanted to have a bit of everything. Intelligence, which Eric gave to me, and then a handsome face from Simon. Now that I got a bit of both as I wanted, I have lost him, the one very important person that I should have paid attention to the most, and also never tried cheating on. I've gone and done the worst thing I could ever do to myself. I realize now that I had not only cheated on Eric, I cheated myself. Of a good life and happiness. Eric just hates me. It doesn't even help matters that you guys are so hell-bent on making me realize just how badly I have behaved. Your words, they, well, have the desired effects as they cut through my skin like a very new and very sharpened knife slicing through vegetables. The comments with some very colorful words are almost life-threatening. If I didn't regret what I did to hurt Eric as much as I have, I would have probably gotten guilt from your comments. I had poured my heart out, sharing my story of infidelity and regret, hoping to find some semblance of understanding and support or something. But instead, you're a disgusting cheater. You deserve to be alone. I hope your husband finds someone better than you. And many others are more colorful, but I'll refuse to mention them since you guys obviously know what you wrote. Your comments were like a barrage of punches, each one landing with precision and cruelty. I felt like I was being torn apart, my fragile emotions shredded by the harsh words. I had expected some criticism, truly, but not this level of vitriol. I had thought that sharing my story would help me find some measure of healing, but instead, it seemed to have opened me up to even more pain. Why had I thought sharing my story would help? Why had I thought that strangers on the internet would be kind and understanding? I feel like a fool, a vulnerable and wounded fool who had just been kicked while she was down. But I cannot even blame you guys now, can I? But then I still found myself wondering how strangers could be so cruel. Do you guys even know that I was already beating myself up over my mistakes before coming here? Or do you not know that I was desperate for forgiveness, for a second chance? But as I read through your comments again, I realized that you guys don't care. You don't care about my pain, my regret, or my desire for redemption. All you cared about was tearing me down, kicking me while I was down. And honestly, you guys have succeeded because I didn't think it was possible to even feel more guilt and contempt for myself. But I do. I feel like I am drowning in a sea of shame and self-loathing. Your comments have unleashed a torrent of negative emotions within me, and I don't even know how to stem the tide. I did all of this without any assistance. I broke the bond and trust that Eric had for me all because of my deranged perspective of people. I had thrown away all we had, so I guess it's not even your fault that I feel like this at all. It's so hard moving on. No, scratch that. I cannot even move on because I'm stuck. I'm stuck in this hollow grave I dug myself. I'm lonely, sad, unhappy, and I even could diagnose myself with depression without visiting the hospital. I have always thought that time would heal wounds, but it only seems to make them deeper. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of sorrow, not having a way of ever resurfacing. Looking through the apartment that used to be ours together, seeing all of his things still stashed neatly in his space. Eric has never been an unorganized person, probably the reason why he's such a great lawyer. His perfume, which I liked so much, still on most of the neatly folded and hanged clothes, tortures me. Our pictures scattered around the house are almost killing me because they remind me of what I had and lost so stupidly. Honestly, I cannot even say I had a real reason to cheat. I was just greedy and selfish, and I stupidly thought I could get away with it. Now, well, the consequences are right at me, and it feels so suffocating, and I feel so choked up by my own guilt. Could this feeling ever go away? Can I ever stop bearing this heavy weight of my guilt and the consequences of my actions? Will I ever stop being tortured every single day by what I could have done to not ruin everything? I can't help but wonder if I'd ever be able to escape the darkness of my past. I guess the answer to that question is never. I will forever be stuck in this moment and feel this heart-wrenching pain of my actions. I can never forgive myself or be able to find redemption. My future feels so bleak and dark and very empty, and the uncertainty of it all just makes all of this hurt even more. I could have done better. I wish I had done better. I wish I didn't do all I did to hurt Eric and with Simon of all people. I had done the unimaginable, and now I am so lost. Sad, really. If this is what the rest of my life looks like, I'm not looking forward to it. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's me again. I just wanted to update you guys. Even though I know through my last post that you guys still hate me and do not want to hear anything from me again because at the end of the day, I still am the one who cheated and did all of those horrible things to Eric. But then again, this is my last post here. It's been 3 months now. The 3 longest months of my life. I keep track of time because that's the only thing I can actually do. Counting the days as they pass me by because I've got all that time to do so. I have no one to talk to. No, scratch that. No one wants to talk to me because they obviously see me as an evil monster. I do not blame anyone, but that doesn't mean I do not feel so lonely and hurt. But it had been my fault entirely, so I cannot even complain. My parents wouldn't even talk to me ever since the wedding, and my siblings also. They probably see me as someone who had brought them disgrace, which I actually have. My guilt is even so much that I feel ashamed to go beg them at all. I feel like I shouldn't even plead because my sins are just too great to be forgiven. Last I heard, Simon was also being given the silent treatment as I am, but I cut off every connection with him, so I have no idea what is with him now. Honestly, I don't even care to know because if I hadn't met him at all, I would probably be married right now, and happily for that matter. I picture us growing old together, hand in hand, with a lifetime of memories and laughter behind us. I picture our family, our children. I guess I will never know that now, ever, because of what I have done to ruin everything. I'm always stuck indoors in my new apartment that I got with the little money I have. Because after the divorce, I couldn't bear to stay in the apartment filled with our memories anymore because it was very suffocating. And, well, Eric had not so subtly told me to leave the apartment. I cannot even go out most of the time because of how much shame I feel, and because people would not stop staring and pointing fingers, which increases my level of guilt more. I wanted to leave town and move somewhere else where no one knew me, but I couldn't because I have no money to even do that. My life feels decided and yet not decided. It's so awful having to live with uncertainties, fear, and anxiety about what the next day would be. And believe me when I say, the pain grows by the day, literally. I wish I had some sort of time machine that could maybe transport me back in time, and I'd be able to right my wrongs. I know I couldn't turn back the clock, but a part of me wished that I could. I wish that I could go back and do it all differently. I have thought about all the what-ifs, all the maybes, all the could-haves. I have thought about how different my life would be if I had only made better choices. But life doesn't give us second chances, does it? It just keeps moving forward, leaving us to deal with the consequences of our actions. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of shame and guilt. I feel like I'm really trapped in a never-ending cycle of pain and regrets. Looking at myself in the mirror these days feels like a chore, because when I do look at myself, I barely can recognize my reflection, the person staring back at me. I would probably get the role of a zombie if I ever applied. With the way I look now, I feel like a stranger to myself, a stranger who made a mess of things, and I have no idea how to fix it. I probably never would. Sad how my life has turned out now, though. I imagine if I ever died, it would be out of loneliness, and maybe no one will show up at my burial. That's how alone I am at the moment. And the painful thing is, it isn't ending anytime soon, or maybe forever. Well, I sure hope that you guys learned a thing or two from my story, even though you hate me. I can tell you that it wouldn't even be nice ever falling into this trap of one's delusions like I did, because I can tell you for free that it isn't exactly a good spot to stay in. I hope you guys will really not end up like I have, because honestly, I wouldn't even wish this on my enemy. So well, thanks and goodbye.